A single hair, a faint fingerprint, and a phone that should have been silent were the only clues left behind at a crime scene that seemed impossible to solve. But in the hands of forensic experts, those tiny fragments would expose a killer hiding in plain sight. Tonight, we unravel how science solved the unsolvable. In a world where murderers believe they can outsmart justice, forensic science proves them wrong. From invisible fingerprints to DNA smaller than a grain of sand, every crime scene whispers a story. Tonight, we step into the shadows of the impossible, where detectives and scientists unravel mysteries that once seemed unsolvable. This is the story of how forensic files turned silence into truth. The husband, distraught, told officers he had been away on a business trip, returning just hours after the incident. His alibi appeared to check out. Still, detectives couldn't rule him out. Family tragedies often have connections close to home. Yet without evidence, suspicions are only shadows. Forensic investigators arrived, ready to comb through every inch of the house. What they found that night would seem insignificant at first, tiny, almost invisible, but would eventually unravel an impossible crime scene. On the living room floor, under the victim's hand, lay a single strand of hair. At first glance, it could have been her own. But technicians carefully sealed it, knowing even one piece of hair might hold DNA that could change everything. Near the window, the glass frame appeared clean, almost too clean. Whoever opened it had either worn gloves or wiped it down after. But under ultraviolet light, a faint trace appeared, smudges of something invisible to the naked eye. It wasn't a full fingerprint, but enough of a ridge pattern remained to suggest human contact. As evidence was collected, detectives started mapping out possible scenarios. Was this a burglary gone wrong? A stalker who knew her? Or could it be someone with a personal grudge? The puzzle pieces didn't align, leaving the case teetering on the edge of impossibility. But forensic science thrives in the impossible. At the lab, the hair was tested. It belonged not to the victim, but to an unknown male. The DNA sequence didn't match the husband, family, or anyone in the immediate circle. This raised even more questions. Who was this man? How had he entered the home without leaving clear signs of forced entry? Meanwhile, the ridge patterns on the glass were enhanced using a new forensic chemical process. This technology allowed partial prints to be reconstructed digitally. What emerged was remarkable: the faint impression of a thumb that didn't belong to anyone in the household. Yet when police ran the print through their national database, no matches were found. The suspect was someone without a criminal record, or perhaps someone who had never been fingerprinted. The case grew colder by the day, and the family mourned without answers. But investigators refused to let it fade. 2 weeks later, a breakthrough came from a different angle. An analyst working late reviewed the victim's phone records. At first, nothing seemed unusual: calls to friends, family, work. But in the last 24 hours before her death, there had been a series of blocked calls from an unknown number. Cross-referencing cell tower data, detectives traced the location of those calls to an area just 3 miles from the crime scene. Suddenly, the net began to tighten. His workplace was near the victim's office, and months before, she had filed a minor complaint about being followed after work. She hadn't named a suspect, but now the dots were connecting. Police brought Cross in for questioning. Calm and composed, he denied everything. He claimed he had never met the victim, never been near her home, and had no idea why he was being accused. But forensics was about to confront him with the truth. The partial fingerprint from the window, when compared to Cross's freshly taken prints, showed undeniable similarities. It wasn't a perfect match, but it narrowed the suspect pool to less than 1 in several thousand. Combined with the DNA from the hair strand, the evidence was tightening around him. Still, Cross held firm. His defense was simple: contamination. He argued that his work as a repairman could explain how his DNA or prints might have been transferred indirectly. But forensic scientists knew how to dismantle that claim. The DNA strand from the crime scene contained not just his genetic profile, but root material, suggesting it had been pulled out directly in a struggle, not transferred casually. Moreover, advanced fingerprint analysis placed his thumb impression on the inside of the window frame, exactly where someone would push to open it. No indirect contact could explain that. The final nail came from digital forensics. Investigators obtained a warrant to check Cross's phone. Though he had deleted most of his recent data, forensic software was able to recover fragments. Among them were location pings placing him near the victim's home on multiple nights leading up to the crime, including the night it happened. The once impossible case was suddenly clear. In court, prosecutors laid out the story piece by piece, showing how Cross had developed an obsession with the victim, watching her for weeks, studying her patterns, and finally acting on his fixation. The jury listened as forensic experts explained how a single hair, a faint fingerprint, and invisible digital traces painted a picture no alibi could erase. Cross was convicted of first-degree murder, sentenced to life without parole. The family finally had justice. But what struck everyone most was how close this case had come to being unsolved. Without the persistence of forensic investigators, the scene would have remained impossible, the questions forever unanswered. Forensic Files has always shown us that behind every dark crime lies a trail waiting to be uncovered. The smallest detail, the thing no one else notices, becomes the loudest truth in the hands of science. A hair on the floor, a smudge on glass, or a cell tower ping may seem meaningless. But together, they tell the story of what really happened. This case reminds us that even when crimes seem impossible to solve, forensic science gives victims a voice long after they've been silenced. The impossible crime scene was solved not by luck, but by science. A single strand of hair, a partial fingerprint, and the digital trail of a stalker gave a voice to the victim and exposed the killer. Cases like these remind us that every detail matters, and no crime is ever truly perfect. In the end, the truth will always surface because Forensic Files never sleep. Thank you for watching. Stay curious, stay safe, and remember, science always leaves a trace.